Hello, my name is Terina Matthews Davis, and I currently am working as a senior vice president at Wells Fargo, where my team is responsible for our early talent execution of our undergrad and graduate internships. And then we're fully responsible for when our program participants join full time, their 2 to 3 years with the bank.
Great. And how did you get into this position? I mean, what was the road from U of L to where you are now?
Wow, what a road. I always like to say I'm blessed to say that even though I'm only like 21, I've had 3 careers in my lifetime. So I graduated from U of L with a Bachelor of Arts in middle school math and Spanish. And then I taught math and Spanish at Stewart Middle in Louisville for about a year and a half. And it was a year and a half too long. It was not, 12, 13-year-olds were just not my thing. I had such a good time at U of L that I should have majored in out of the classroom experience and not necessarily in classroom. Although I graduated with a really good GPA, I still had a much better time outside of class, as you might imagine. So after that, I came back to U of L actually, and I used the Career Development Center, and I went through a series of assessments to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, because it was not being a middle school teacher. And I remember the counselor looking at me and saying, "What was the best time in your life?" And I was like, "Oh, in my whole 22 years, the best time in my life was on as a college student." So she said, "Okay, find mentors and ask them how they got to do the jobs they're doing." And so I went back to the folks in Res Life where I worked, and I went back to Jenny Sawyer, and I said, "How did you guys get to do this?" And they all said, "Oh, we have a master's in higher education." And I thought to myself, "Oh my gosh, my mom's not going to pay for any more schooling." And they said, "But most times when you go in higher ed, you get an assistantship and it pays for your school. You just work and, you know." So I was like, "Okay, where do I go?" And back then it was like right when the internet just started, but we still had to, like get these big, thick books that gave us like all about the program. So I had to like write to all these schools and like get all this stuff in the mail and take a GRE, blah, blah, blah. So I ended up getting admitted to Bowling Green State University in Ohio, which is where I'm from, Ohio State University, which is where I'm from, and the University of Georgia. And I'd never been outside of Kentucky or Ohio. So my family, although I was excited by Georgia, and the residence life area seems to be it's like the NFL for residence life. Like if you land at Georgia, like you're in res life like heaven. And so, but my grandparents just laid down a gauntlet. Like, "We want you to come back here. We want you to graduate from Ohio State. It's literally 5 minutes from home. We're sad we lost you to Louisville, but now we get to bring you back." So I got a little family pressure. I chose to go back to Ohio State, got my master's in higher ed, worked at Ohio State for 12 years. While I was there, I was like, okay, well, I'm working in student affairs, and this is not what you do because you want to be rich in life. It's what you do because you're passionate about it. And so I realized that as an employee at Ohio State, you get to go to college, you get to go to school for free. So I got admitted to the Masters of HR program, did not know how these two were going to come together, but just while my students were in class during the day, I was a hall director. I might as well be in class with them and be up all night with them. So I got my master's in and then got my master's in HR. And networking is similar a theme in my life. It's all about meeting people, connecting people, networking with people, and having these networks before I might need them. And so in the master's program in HR, ended up joining the National Black MBA Association, became a leader in the National Black MBA Association chapter in Columbus, started meeting with corporate partners, did an event for one using my higher ed skills, and they were like, "Oh, we got to create a job for you." I never thought that I was going to leave higher ed. In my mind, I'd just been admitted to the PhD program at Ohio State. I was going to get my PhD in higher ed. I was going to become the vice president of student affairs at Ohio State, and I was going to retire at Ohio State. That's just the way it was going to happen. Well, corporate America and what everybody in higher ed says, the dark side, kind of reached out to me. I've never been in a situation where I was brought into a room at Limited Brands, which at that time was the parent company of Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body, White Barn Candle. And they said, here's a whiteboard, create your own job based on what we need, and then create your own salary, and then create your own budget to go along with it. So I was like, wow, that's exciting. So we did that. We literally spent like 3 hours, and we literally whiteboarded a job that would use my 12 years of experience from a college and university to help them develop their own college and university recruiting strategy. So that's how I got into higher ed. I did that for 3 years at Limited Brands, then came back to Louisville, worked at Yum. And at Yum, I had a great opportunity to do several jobs. I did campus recruiting. I also did experience hire recruiting. And then I also was voluntold into being an HR business partner, which really opened up, looking back on it now, it was great that I was forced outside of my comfort zone, because I really got to experience and lead leaders. And so that really helped me develop my repertoire of, I can be a leader. I am a leader, and I can lead professionals, and I can lead people who are much senior than myself and help them see things differently. Not only as it relates to recruiting junior talent from colleges and universities, but even about themselves and how their employees see them and how they can relate differently to their employees to build a better environment. And so with that, I've worked at some great brands. So Limited Brands, Yum Brands, JP Morgan, S&P Global, and now at Wells Fargo.
Wow, that's a lot. I had no idea you had such a background.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So yeah, especially with all the Ohio State. I saw that in your bio, but I didn't know that the whole backstory of how that's how you ended up, in kind of corporate America.
Yeah, it was never a plan to be in corporate America, but it's actually worked out. And literally when I took the job at Limited Brands, I said, because everybody on campus was like, what do we need to do to keep you? And they're like, besides salary, because we cannot match the salary, right?
Right.
And I said, but here's the deal. I'm only leaving for 5 years so that I can get real life corporate experience and then come back to call this university and share with our university students what corporations really look for when they're recruiting university students. So as everyone told me what happened, it did happen. I got sucked into the salary and the lifestyle, right? But I did maintain my commitment, right? So I had to figure out ways to be connected at Louisville and to be connected at Ohio State and to stay in partnership with clubs and organizations to really do what I said I was going to do and help students understand what companies are looking for when they're recruiting collegiate talent.
Well, you have been such a great representative of the University of Louisville, especially Louisville alumni. I want you to tell me the story, or how did you end up at Louisville? What made you choose the University of Louisville and go from there?
It's a crazy thing. I literally had paid my money to go to a school that, now that I'm a Buckeye, we can never say the name of that school, but it is a school named after a state north of Ohio. And I paid my deposit to go there, much to the chagrin of my family, but I was going there as a full-fledged Buckeye. Like everything from my room in the residence hall was going to be red, and I was going to be a Buckeye no matter where I went to school. And then I was in the national high school national cheerleading competition down in Florida, and ended up, my mom, because I was only 17 at the time, and ended up, the Lady Bird coach talked to my mom and told me I was obviously too tall to be a cheerleader in college, but would I consider trying out for Lady Birds at Louisville? And we had never heard of Louisville. We had never even ventured. I had already been through all my college visits at that point. And so I tried out for Lady Birds. And although I didn't make it, I was just determined that I was going to be a Lady Bird. And I told my mom, we're scrapping all of my plans and we're going to Louisville. And she's like, we've never heard of this school. It's out of state. I've got to pay out of state tuition. But okay. And 2 weeks later, I applied, I got admitted, I went to orientation, and I fell in love.
Okay, so think back to that young lady that applied, got admitted, and fell in love and scrapped all of her other plans to end up at the University of Louisville. Looking back now with all of your perspective and all of your wisdom, what advice would you have given yourself as a freshman student just arriving on campus?
Well, I was really homesick because everybody at Louisville was from Kentucky somewhere, and it seemed like they all knew each other. And being out of state student and being Black, it seemed like all the Black students that they were all from Kentucky and they were all connected because they were Porter Scholars. And they had all these like Porter Scholar events that I wasn't invited to because I wasn't a Porter Scholar. And so for my first like 2 months, I just was like calling home and crying and just begging my mom to come back and get me. And I would then give myself the same advice that I ended up taking, is like, find something to get involved with to get you connected. And so the first thing that I did was I got connected with the residence hall leadership. I lived in Unitas Tower. And so I became like the representative from my floor in the Unitas Tower student government. And then it just moved from there. Then I was in RSA, and then it's like, oh, I got to apply to be an RA, and then I'm going to apply to be an SOSer. And so then all the things started coming to fruition, and that's how then I became, and then my first year I applied to be an RA and an SOSer, and I got put on the wait list for both. And I was devastated. And I remember walking into Jenny Sawyer's office like, what do you mean? I'm great. And she's like, this is why you're on the wait list. Like, but she took me under her wing. And then the next year I got it. I was really bummed about not being selected as an RA. I came back as a sophomore to move back into the Unitas Tower. And as we were moving in, I remember the area coordinator called me and she said, you wanted to meet with me the next day. And I said, Mom, I want you to stay. I don't know if I'm in trouble already or what. But sure enough, I met with her and she's like, okay, we need you to be an RA in Threcold, and we need you to do that starting today. So my mom and I literally just moved me into Unitas. We had to move me out of Unitas into Threcold, and all of a sudden I was thrown into being an RA. So I would give myself the advice of like, just take risk, take chances, find some organization to make you feel connected, and then grow from there. I also, the advice that I give to college students now is get outside of your comfort zone. When I was at U of L, I would say I had so many great memories, and even some of the tougher ones made me into the person that I am now, because I did non-traditional things specifically for Black students, right? So I was an RA. Back then there were 60 RAs. I think there were 9 of us who were Black. I was in SOAR. I wanted to be in SGA. I am a member of a historically Black sorority, and I knew that coming in. I knew when I went to college I was going to be a Delta. Like, that was like not a question. I was raised to be a Delta. Red just looks too good on me. But I just did things that were not traditionally what my Black friends are saying, like, those are the white things to do. And so I'm looking back at myself now, and I'm so glad I had those experiences. Diversity has always been very important to me, not necessarily so much about me learning about others, but me dispelling a lot of the myths that people have, especially, I mean, if I'm frank, people in Kentucky kind of get a little, blinders on, no derby pun intended, and haven't met a lot of people like me. So it's about me showcasing, like, we're not scary, yes, we can be bold and kind of in your face, but still like to get things done and work on behalf of the university. And I didn't make a lot of friends with some of the Black people for that, but now 30 years later, last year when I was home for homecoming, and back in Louisville for homecoming, some of my friends like kind of cornered my husband and were like, do you know how awesome your wife is? Like, in undergrad, she was always like a mover and a shaker, and like none of that has changed. And she was always in all these different groups. And in the end, it ended up helping the entire Black community. And now we're looking at it like, wow, you're really lucky that's your wife. So
I like that. Well, you definitely were a mover and a shaker, talking about how involved you were in every organization. It seems like there wasn't one that you weren't involved in. I want to explore that a little bit. And if you could just talk about when you look back, what are some of your favorite memories that stand out on you? I mean, where did you have the most fun? What are some, you think back like right off the top of your head, oh, I remember we went to this party or that game, or talk about some of the times.
You know what? I think the crazy thing is, I mean, I had so many great times at Louisville. But I would say one of the things that stood out the most is I was raised on college football. I mean, I'm from Columbus, Ohio, so Ohio State football is everything. So I was raised on college football. So to come to Louisville, where it's not about football and it's all about basketball, it was like just such an amazing like switch in my brain. And back then, your football tickets were free as long as you camped out for your basketball tickets. And so I remember like a 3-day camp out for basketball tickets. And I mean, it was just like so crazy that we had to do this, but it was so much fun. I just remember going up and down the line all night long, like meeting people, everyone's sharing food, and everyone's like tagging in to go shower and come back. I mean, that was like, it sounds like insane. And now they have this, now they're so easy. It's like a whole lottery system. You don't have to get out of your bed. I mean, back then it's like you had to prove like you were die hard if you camped out for 3 days to get your basketball tickets. So that was a great memory for me. I think one of the memories that stands out is, again, being on Ohio State football, growing up on Ohio State football. My grandfather got me into it. I remember I went to my first Louisville game and like nobody was really excited to go to Louisville football. And I was like, what's wrong? It's football day. Like, come on. They're like, this is Louisville football. And so I remember just going over to the game by myself because I had my tickets and I wanted to go. I'm a football girl. And it was incredibly hot in Cardinal Stadium. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go get a drink. And then I went downstairs, and probably shouldn't share this, but it's like they sold beer in the stadium. And like, again, I've grown up on Ohio State football where there's no alcohol. And so I was like, I'm going to test the waters. I'm this little 18-year-old. I'm going to see if they sell me beer. And they sold me beer. And I was so excited. And so my memory was like going back to the dorm that night and calling my grandfather. He's like, how was your first game? I was like, oh, we lost. But guess what? You can buy beer in the stadium. And so the next game, my grandfather drove down from Columbus because he wanted to experience this with me. And we went to a Louisville game and I ordered a beer with my grandfather. So that was like a fun memory. My grandfather passed away 4 years ago. So I always think of him when I think about, every time I have a beer at a football game, I always think about my first beer at a football game with my grandfather. It was at a Louisville football game. Totally illegal. I don't advise that now, but back then the drinking age had just changed. When I was 17 is when it went to 21. So I wasn't, so used to, when I was 17, it was 19. And then it switched to 21 right before I was about to be 18 because I was like so distraught with that. But so yeah, like that's a great memory. But like there's so many memories. I remember like running for student government services vice president the first time and losing. And I was just like heartbroken. And then running the second time and winning. I remember what it was like when the sorority chose me and I was online and everybody knew it. And like, I remember that's a great memory. I remember going to the 92 Fiesta Bowl when we weren't even supposed to be there and beating Alabama. So now I'm proud to say that both of my alma maters, I've witnessed both of my alma maters beat Alabama. So when anybody says roll tide to me, I'm like, yep, both of my alma maters have done that. I remember, some of the things that are current to today. I remember there being a big racial outbreak at Louisville. And I remember being one of the leaders to bring both sides to the table and really talk in a calm way. And it's just sad that we're still dealing with that, almost 30 years later. But I remember that being a pivotal point in my growth and development to be able to listen to both sides and having friends that were in that fraternity that were alleged to do or say these horrible things to a Black woman and just being torn as to how I would continue to relate to them. I mean, I remember being a Rho Chi for the first time, and I'm in a Black sorority, and like understanding what white Greek life was like and what are more of the similarities between the two and not necessarily the differences. I think one of my fondest memories, I can't go without saying, being an SOSer. Like, I mean, being an SOSer is like, you are like the end all be all on campus. Like, everybody knows you. And even when you don't want them to, you can't walk like 10 feet without, people stopping you. But I think being an SOSer really it was a catalyst to me being elected to everything else. Like, once you get out there as an SOSer, everything kind of happens for you. Homecoming, I was on the homecoming court twice, in the top 5 twice. So I'm constantly like always the bridesmaid, never the bride, but I was finally the bride 3 years ago in real life. And I think the wildest SGA memory that stays with me forever is we used to start all of the parties, not SGA, SOSer. We used to start all of the Red Barn parties with our orientation class with Baby Got Back. And so that's my go-to karaoke song. So whenever we go on vacation, we're on a cruise, my husband's like, are you going to karaoke? And I'm like, you know it. And my go-to song, get everybody on the floor, because I know all the words to Baby Got Back. And I mean, my husband, the first time he heard me do it, he was like, you're incredible. Like, how do you know every word? You don't even look at the words. You got it. I was like, this is the way we started every orientation party. And I was like right in the middle. So I mean, I have so many memories of Louisville, both good and bad, but truly my experience at Louisville, my networking, it's the foundation for who I am today.
That's great. And listening to you tell your story, one thing that sticks out to me is that of perseverance, because you talk about how excited you were to get something, and then you didn't get it, but then the next year you reapplied. And there's so many times it seems like on campus that happened to you, where you didn't give up after the first time, but you stuck with it, you persevered, and then you got it the next year. And
oh yeah,
that tells me a lot about you, about kind of who you are. And I want to go back and talk about something that you mentioned when you came down from Ohio, how you were one of the only Black females on campus, and everybody's from Kentucky, and you wanted to break down some of those barriers and preconceived notions. And I asked you earlier, what advice would you have for your freshman self? And I wanted to ask, what advice would you have for Black women arriving on campus today? What advice would you have for them in 2020 who might find themselves in your shoes today? And I thought that might be interesting.
Yeah, I would definitely say, and it's one of the things I tell, I have my goddaughter just started college I tell her she goes to Georgia Tech, and I tell her she's on a track scholarship. So even because Georgia Tech's in the ACC, so I am like a loyalist. So I am a Louisville loyalist. I'm a Big Ten loyalist with the Buckeyes. And I told my goddaughter, I'm like, I'm only going to wear Georgia Tech clothes when you're running track. That is it. I need one shirt. I'll wear it to every track meet. We're good. Otherwise, I'm not wearing Georgia Tech. I would say you got to get outside of your comfort zone. I'm glad that I went to Louisville. I'm glad that I didn't go to Ohio State for undergrad, because my whole high school class pretty much went to either Ohio State or Notre Dame. So it was great to not be where I knew anybody. And it was great, and it was scary at the same time. I tell students all the time, like, meet people different than yourself. I didn't have the best roommate experiences in Unitas Tower. I mean, my first roommate was a woman from a small town in Kentucky. She'd never seen Black people face to face in her 18 years of life. So she was just as afraid of me as I was of her. So that didn't last very long, I must say. But I got to know her. And we just like figured out what we had in common versus what we didn't have in common. I would definitely say try things, even though people say it's not for Black people, right? I mean, listen, I had the most amazing time in SOAR. I got to travel to so many places. I was in South Dakota, for goodness sakes. Like, we had a SOAR conference in South Dakota. I remember calling my mom and telling her I was going to South Dakota. She's like, wait, you're doing what? Like, how is that? And then like so many alums, when I would go and do these SOAR events, they wanted to help me. They wanted to figure out how they could help me. And I'd say, take advantage of the alumni organization up front. build those networks before you need them. So as a freshman, I wasn't looking for an internship, but nowadays I know freshmen do get internships. So I would be selling SOAR all day. I sell to every student going to college. Find a way to connect with your alumni office from a student perspective, even if you're on the phone bank calling people for money group, like that's a great way to meet a lot of alums and they just want to help you. So I definitely, my big coaching moment for current college students is just like, get outside of your comfort zone. Like break the ice with people who are different from yourself. I mean, I have lifelong friends from U of L who are so different from me. And we've gone through it, especially politically. And since over the last like 16 years, my friends, like we've really like had some really tough conversations, but that doesn't mean they're not my friends, right? We now see things very differently. And now that we're old enough to like, not just vote the way your parents have already told you, have always told you to vote. Because I remember sitting in the library when I was a freshman, punching out my absentee ballot holes, not knowing what the heck I was doing, but just the fact that my mom and my grandmother told me to punch these ones and then send the thing back, right? But then as a student at Louisville, got really involved in politics because I was an SGA. And so we were on the grassroots campaign team of Bill Clinton and really were like instrumental in getting the word out to college students at Louisville about Bill Clinton. And it was like a crazy thing because I was in student government, the 4 executive officers, 3 of us are Democrats, 1 Republican. And so we had to maintain our relationship leading the student population at Louisville while maintaining who we were politically. So, I mean, that was a big lesson for all of us. We laugh about that now because I remember, so it's our AVP, she was the Republican, the president, the EVP, and me, SVP, we were all the Democrats. So we called our office space a truce area, like it was a neutral zone. So nobody could have any political information. We were the second SGA officers to have those offices. So it was right when the student center was built. So our place was a neutral zone. So we had that meeting on a Friday. This is a neutral zone. We come back in on Monday morning, and I was always the first one into the office of the 4 of us. And before cell phones, I remember calling our president EVP, like, you're not going to believe what's on the door. And they're like, I'm not even going to tell you. You just got to get to the office. And when they get to the office, our AVP, who her door was the first door in the student government office, is covered with Republican campaign material, like covered from top to bottom. And I was like, we called her, it's like, are you crazy? Like, this is war. And so we all like went down to the Democratic headquarters. We got so much stuff to put all on our doors in the office, like no longer is this a neutral zone. So that was like amazing. But I would tell my freshman self, I would tell current students, especially out-of-state students, like you just got to meet some of these folks in Kentucky, get to go home with them. I mean, although I was only 3 hours away, so my mom didn't have a problem coming and getting me. But I did spend a couple holidays in Louisville just to understand like the Kentucky traditions. And so that was a great learning experience for me as well.
Great, that's some great stories there. You've already accomplished so much in your life, but you still have so much road ahead of you. I guess I'm interested myself, but I'm sure everybody else that will be watching this will want to know what's next for you. You know, when you think down the road, the next 5, 10 years, next, even 15, 20, what's still out there that you want to accomplish? What goals do you have left, both personally and professionally, and just what's next for you?
So I would say I'm a newlywed. I like to say we're newlyweds until we're 5 years in. So on September 1st, we celebrate our 3rd anniversary. So what's next for me personally is I'm continuing to focus on my marriage and our relationship, and we like to travel. So we want us to find a vaccine to COVID so we can get back out on the road again. So that's a focus of mine. And then personally, again, with the sorority, I have been selected to be in our sorority leadership development program. And so I'm figuring out how I want to use that and building my leadership in Delta Sigma Theta. And then professionally, I've always been passionate about diversity and inclusion. And as I've led campus recruiting for 3 major companies, I've always helped them to figure out how to build a better diversity pipeline to build their bench for the organization. And so I've always thought about, what if that was my profession? Like, what if that was my career? And how do I make that happen? And if you asked me if I had a genie and a bottle and 3 wishes, what would I do for the rest of my life? I would rub that bottle and I would tell that genie, I want to either go back to Louisville, I don't want Dean Martis to get really annoyed with me, but I would come back to Louisville and I'd either be Vice President of Student Affairs at Louisville or Vice President of Student Affairs at Ohio State. So that would be the dream job. And everyone says, why Vice President? Why not President? And I liken that to be the president is the academic officer, even though I know it's the provost, right? But the president is class. And the Vice President of Student Affairs is out of class, because they're doing all the fun stuff, the sports teams and the sororities and fraternities and student government and SOAR, you know what I mean? So I liken it to be I like the out of classroom experience, and the president is more the classroom experience. They're out there raising money, shaking hands, all that kind of stuff. I like to have fun with the students. It keeps me young, right? So, professionally, I feel like I have a lifetime ahead of me, even though I was meeting with a recruiter and it was you have more behind you than you have ahead of you. And I was like, uh-oh, there's an awakening moment. But I think, I think that's one of the things that's made me who I am, is I don't have it all mapped out. Because I feel like when I have it all mapped out, that's when God comes in with his sense of humor and gives me something different. So I like to kind of go with the flow, but at the end of the day, I know what would be dream for me.
That's great. I only have one more question for you. It's if you could fill in the blank. I love the University of Louisville because.
Wow. Oh. I love the University of Louisville because it helped me to step out of my comfort zone. It helped me to be the woman that I am today. It gave me the passion and the spirit to just be bold and to speak my truth and live my truth. It gave me a family that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. I think in one of the questions that I saw on the list of questions was what about your U of L mentors? And I had so many. Joni Burke really helped me through understanding Greek life, and all the folks in Res Life, Frank Bianzo and Pam and Shannon Staten, and all those people helped me understand Res Life and just student affairs in general. And it helped me with my Res Life career at Ohio State. But I would definitely say I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the impact of Jenny Sawyer and the Sawyer family on my life. And she took me in as a 19-year-old student, brought me into her family, and I've been in her family ever since then. I've been through, her daughters and their weddings and their babies and, her birthdays and Tom's birthdays and, her mother. And I'm literally their daughter. I'm invited to everything. I'm never left out of an email group chain. And and that all started by me storming into Jenny's office and saying, why didn't you hire me? And so she saw something in me. And over the years, anytime I'm going to make a move in my job, whether it's in higher ed or even in corporate America, I know that I can call her and she can talk me through, or at least listen to me. And even when I was in higher ed and I was getting off the ledge, I'd call her up and I'd be like, Mom, and she's like, calm down. So and that's why it was such a privilege and honor that she received this honor last year as Alumna of the Year. And I was able to surprise and be a part of her presentation. And so what U of L has brought for me is a family outside of my family, outside of my DNA family. And obviously I couldn't do any of this without my mom, who saw in me, who was going to make it happen. she's a single parent, had me at 16 years old, and was like, I know my daughter's going to graduate from college, and then my daughter's going to go to grad school, and then she's going to go to grad school. And she trusted me. We learned this thing together. We picked Louisville together. And my mom came my freshman year. This is no joke. My mom came every single weekend because I was so homesick. So she knew if I came home, I'd want to stay. So she came to me. And my mom was such a celebrity on campus. Like, as I continued to grow my leadership, she would always park in the visitor parking right by Miller Hall. And the visitor center would have to call up to the SG office and like, oh, Terina, your mom's here. And by the time my mom would make it to my office, she'd have like this whole entourage, like, oh, you're Terina's mom. Oh, you're Terina's mom. So she'd have like a whole following like coming to my office. And she used to get so annoyed by everybody calling her Terina's mom. But now that like I've ascended to doing all these things, and she's having been on the alumni board at both Louisville and Ohio State, and she comes to all these events, and she's like, it's kind of cool to be Terina's mom. But I know I would not have been able to do any of this without her. And for the past 6 years, my husband has like been on this journey with me. He's a Cardinal by marriage, but if I gave him his druthers, he would be saying that BBN stuff. I know, but he went to school at EKU. So, they're kind of brainwashed in Richmond too. But he's been on this Louisville train with me. And even though he's definitely a Buckeye, but he's a Cardinal by marriage, he will gladly put on his Cardinal attire when needed. But he sees this passion that I have. If we want to open our home, if I say, honey, there's a Louisville student here in Charlotte and they need a place to stay. He's like, okay. And he's met all my Louisville friends. And so he knows the passion that I have for the university, and he just supports me in that as well. So Louisville's just given me so much that, it is truly basically the foundation of who I am and how I got here today.